Welcome to Gavels Down, Voices Up with me, Rachel King. This is where we leave convention at the courtroom door and dive into your real stories, bold and unpopular opinions, and change-making ideas that really shake the legal world up and change where change is desperately needed. I'm here to shake it up, talk about unfiltered insights, and amplify voices that need to be heard. So are you ready? Let's get it. Put the gavels down and the voices up. Hey there, it's Rachel King, and today on Gavels Down, Voices Up, it's all about the prenup. That's right, except that like most things as we come into 2024, the prenup has also gone through a change, and the political correctness is causing us to call them premarital agreements. That's right. Same with the post-nup, which we're not going to talk about today, but post-nups are also now called postmarital agreements. So let's talk about premarital agreements, why they're coming into play, how important they are, and what you can do. As you know, I'm a strategic litigator. I'm in all of the courts all of the time. I shouldn't say all of the courts because there are certain courts I don't go into, but I do family law. And premarital agreements get litigated a lot. Why? Because a premarital agreement is a contract that you enter into with your significant other before you get married that basically handles what's going to happen to all of the property and everything if you get divorced. So there's a lot of controversy over this. In many cases, that premarital agreement that was agreed to prior to marriage on divorce, the one spouse is like, hey, no, I didn't know that you were going to end up having billions and trillions of dollars. I want spousal support. So we end up litigating the validity of these premarital agreements. Every state has different requirements. In California, it's quite interesting because actually the validity of the premarital agreement is decided at the time that the agreement is enforced. Yeah, that's right. If I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to get married in 2024. I want to do a premarital agreement. If I get divorced in 2040 and the legislators have come in and decided, or the courts have said that premarital agreements aren't valid, I'm not going to have a valid premarital agreement because in 2040, that's the laws that are going to affect the validity of the premarital agreement. Let's not worry about that now. Let's talk about premarital agreements and what is happening. Historically, I think people thought that premarital agreements were limited to the incredibly wealthy or somebody that comes in with a huge divide. That's still common, right? If you have two celebrities that are getting married, I suspect if Taylor Swift ends up marrying, what's his name again, that football player, then there's going to be a pretty locked in premarital agreement because yes, all of her assets that she had prior to her marriage, all her billions now, are her separate property. But what about that work that she's going to be doing during the marriage and how all of the goodwill and her name that she built prior to is going to affect her sales through? So I'm guessing if Taylor Swift gets hitched, her premarital agreement is going to be extensive. So yeah, we get it in those kind of situations. But what about all of the rest of us? Why are we getting more and more premarital agreements? Interestingly, I did come across a study that said that more and more average Joes are getting premarital agreements these days. I think that's really great. Is it because people are getting married a little bit later and they've had an opportunity to build their own nest egg? Maybe they bought a house or they have some kind of retirement. Is it because we have two people now that are dual income? We want to make sure that their ability to earn is carried through and that if the marriage dissolves, that there's not going to be a spousal support obligation on other sides. Maybe all of that is relevant. But the bottom line is that now premarital agreements, prenups, they're not just for the rich and famous. Now they're for the Sally and Joe that are getting hitched tomorrow. Well, not tomorrow, because there are timelines, again, at least in California, for where and when your premarital agreement is signed. For example, we've all heard the story or seen the movie where the super wealthy man is going to marry this beautiful little youngin', and on the altar asks her to sign the prenup. God, that'd be devastating. Well, actually, that's not allowed. You can't just spring a prenup on somebody the day of the marriage. There are timelines. There are timelines in place that say if you want this to be valid, not only are both parties to be represented by their own independent attorneys, but the final terms need to be given 7 days prior to the marital date. Now, I don't know when you're going to be listening to this, but don't quote me on the laws because laws change all the time. So you could be listening to this in 2040 and the laws might be a bit different. Know, though, that there are absolutely laws in place to protect maybe the less equal in the premarital agreement so that you're not getting it sprung on you the night before the wedding. That would be awful. One thing that I thought was really interesting about this study that talked to younger people that were getting premarital agreements is that it really afforded them an eye-opening experience that resulted in huge confidence in the relationship. When you're talking about a premarital agreement, you are going through all of the assets that you have. You are listing out everything that you're bringing into the marriage. That's what a premarital agreement does. It says, I have a house, I have a 401k, I have a bank account, I have a business, I have all of these things, and they're mine prior to marriage. And then, of course, it dictates and it talks about what's going to happen if the marriage dissolves. But so many people don't have that financial conversation really in depth prior to getting married. They're all in the honeymoon and the love and the dove and all of the things that maybe they have a general idea. Sometimes people lie and they have no actual idea of the financial status of their partner. A premarital agreement has caused people to have those in-depth discussions, and that when they're done with the premarital agreement, they feel more confident in their relationship and going into the marriage because they both completely understand the financial position of their partner. Maybe it doesn't even need to be a prenup. Maybe we should just be having these conversations and the divorce rate would go down. Then I might be without a job. Oh, no, I wouldn't because people are getting divorced all the time. But I think that's fantastic. If a premarital agreement not only makes you feel confident going into your marriage because you know it's been explained that when you come in with, you're going to leave with, but it also opens up financial communication between you and your partner so that when you're entering into this lifelong contract, because let's be real, a marriage is a business arrangement and a contract, you are going in with eyes wide open. A premarital agreement allows you to go into your marriage with your eyes wide open because unlike all of the other contracts that we have, once you're married, you're taking your spouse as they came. If they were dead ass broke with horrible credit and you got married and you started paying for their lifestyle and making these decisions, it doesn't matter if they said, oh, I have a great job and my credit is great. In a marriage, you are entering into a contract to be husband and wife or husband or whatever you decide to identify with. You are taking on this relationship and you're accepting your spouse as they come. So man, if a prenup is helping open up that lingo and having good communication, I think that is fantastic. Not only is it a tool to give you protection, it's a tool to help your relationship. Certain things happen if you don't, right? So there's going to be some people that say, well, I didn't do a prenup and oh my goodness, it's too late. Well, like I said at the beginning, there are postnups. You can do them. I oftentimes see people doing postnups or post-marital agreements if they've had some kind of issue within the marriage where they're contemplating divorce and they're like, all right, we're not going to get divorced, but let's at least make some clear boundaries as to what's going to happen if we're getting divorced. So that can be done. A post-marital agreement can be done. But let's say you don't do either. There are still laws in place, the family law codes that say how assets are going to be divided. And if you don't have a premarital agreement, then we rely on those. If you do have a premarital agreement and it's invalidated, we go back to the law. You might be thinking, hey, Rachel, why would I do a prenup if I don't know if it's going to be valid and it costs money now? That's a really great question. But the answer is that you can handle certain things. It's another layer of protection. If, for example, inheritance is separate property, so that means you get to take it as your own when you leave, regardless if you have a prenup, and you're relying on that law, and then sometime during your marriage that law shifts, and changes, and you don't have a premarital agreement to say something like that, you are relying on the law. The premarital agreement, even if you are okay with how the laws would divide and divorce anyway, or my favorite, I'm never getting divorced. The prenup is your secondary resource to show, hey, when we got married, this is what we wanted. So I think premarital agreements are really great. I don't have one. Why don't I have one? Because I was dead broke when I got married. My husband was dead broke when we got married. So everything that we have is community. It would be divided. There are certain circumstances where you may not actually need a premarital agreement, but more and more common are premarital agreements when we have career-driven individuals. We have people that are earning a lot of money, influencers that have a lot of cash coming in. You've figured out how to be self-supporting. You've maybe bought yourself some of the finer things, or a house or a car. You've got things going on, and you want to make sure that while you love this person, if they leave you or you leave them, that you get to go and leave as whole as possible. And that's what a premarital agreement does, regardless of status and wealth. It gives you that inner peace.
And now for a quick break. This episode of Gavels Down, Voices Up is proudly brought to you by King Law Firm Attorneys at Law Incorporated. We're not just about winning cases, we're about making a difference. Whether it's family law, probate litigation, or standing up against elder abuse. We bring experience, empathy, and excellence to the courtroom. At King Law Firm, we're more than lawyers. We're your team, in your corner, advocating for your rights and making your voice heard. Visit us at thelawyerking.com and on the socials at The Lawyer King to see how we fight with you and for you. King Law Firm Attorneys at Law Incorporated, where your fight becomes our fight. Now, let's get back to today's episode.
What I don't think premarital agreements do is I don't think they cause any damage to the relationship. I once had a client call me and say, my wife really wants to do a premarital agreement, but I think that's really bad to go into a marriage already thinking about divorce. I kind of get it, right? It's like, oh, am I giving bad juju if I create a contract that already spells out what's going to happen if we get divorced? Here's the thing. The second that you get married, divorce is an option, because there's only two options. You stay married and die, or you get divorced and then you die. So handling a premarital agreement isn't necessarily making divorce more likely. Divorce is already likely. If you can talk about it and you can get it together with your spouse and have this communication, not only, again, are you maybe looking out for yourself, maybe you're looking out for your spouse too, but as many people have said, you might come out of this feeling more connected to your spouse because of your communication and the ability to talk about really hard things. I do think it's important to address that prenups are for marriage only. It is a premarital agreement, also known as a prenuptial agreement, but nuptials are kind of passé, right? If you're not getting married, a prenup isn't going to protect you. So for example, if you decide to cohabitate with your boyfriend and you guys are sharing the bills and buying houses and having children and all of the activities that are traditionally that of a married couple, having a prenup isn't going to come into play. Why? Because a prenup takes power on the marriage. It needs the marriage to be powerful. But there are cohabitation agreements, and they are also becoming common. So you decide, hey, we're going to do this and create our life together. We're not going to enter into that business marital contract. We're going to enter into a life together where we share this life's journey, but we also want to have protection. So we do a cohabitation agreement. These can be incredibly helpful, especially as you make life decisions like one person staying home with the kids or assets being purchased and only put in one person's name. Because if that's what's happening and you are not married, there is no spousal support and there's typically no division of assets because you don't have the marital protections. So cohabitation agreements are also becoming really popular because just as many people are getting married as are deciding not to get married, but have that marital type relationship. So what do you say? How do you have this conversation? Because again, it can't be sprung on them at the altar. That's not allowed anymore. It can be a really difficult conversation to have. I think the first place to start is to really trust your instincts. No attorney, no other person can really tell you how to talk to your spouse or to your significant other about this. You know them. I will say in many areas of the law that picking an argument to bring up, well, I want you to sign a prenup because I own the house, probably not the best time to do it. Bring up the topic, say, hey, I would like to talk about the idea of a premarital agreement. Let that idea sink in. Don't turn it into an argument. Let it sink in. Pick a time that you guys can come together and have this conversation. And if it gets icky and sticky, don't have it. End it and come back to it and revisit it. The premarital agreement, for it to be successful, is not going to be used as a sword to stab your partner. It's going to be used as an opportunity to have both of you come into this marriage a little bit more confident. So figure out how to talk about it with your significant other in a way that's going to go over the best. And there are therapists that I've worked with, some really fantastic therapists that will help couples navigate this specific conversation. If you're really uncomfortable with how to do it, maybe reach out to a local therapist and local counselor and see if they can help guide you through this conversation, maybe even through the creation of the premarital agreement. Obviously, they can't draft it. It's a legal document, but maybe they can help past the initial topic and how it's going to play out and what it would look like through a divorce situation so that you both understand really the weight of what you're doing and that you're coming together to create the agreement, because that's what this is. This is an opportunity to come together to create an agreement that will allow you to exit your marriage in a way that is most comfortable, because exiting a marriage is uncomfortable. If you can put a premarital agreement in place that's going to make that a little less awful, man, that's a good way to enter into a marriage. So while you're wedding planning and picking out a cake and buying all of the things, maybe consider a premarital agreement. It's not an odd thing to talk about. In fact, it's becoming a much more common discussion. I had a mom once call me and say, hey, do you do gift certificates? I would like to buy my daughter a premarital agreement and give it to her at her bridal shower. I thought, no, I don't do gift certificates because I have to do conflict checks, but what an interesting thing to do. We've seen people give estate plans to new parents. We've seen all of these other legal strategies that are gifted. Why not gift a premarital agreement, especially now knowing that they'll come out of it better than they were to begin? I would love to hear your take on premarital agreements. And hey, let's throw in the cohabitation agreement as well. Did you like it? Did you not like it? Did it hold up in court? If you're divorced, did it do what you expected it to do? My name's Rachel King. I am an attorney, and this is Gavels Down, Voices Up. Thanks for tuning in to Gavels Down, Voices Up. Like what you heard? Then don't just sit there. Subscribe, share, and tell me your thoughts. I'm Rachel King, bringing not just my opinions to the mic, but about the courtroom too. Your part, keep listening, keep engaging, and until next time, let's keep those gavels down and our voices up. Unmistakably up.